Hi, my name is Ray. Welcome back to the Plant-Based Garden. Today I'm going to share with you how to propagate some different vining plants. I'm going to take different cuttings from different plants to show you just a few different ways to do it. Most vining plants can be propagated in a very similar manner. These are just a few that I have that are big enough to propagate. So right now I'm going to start with this silvery Pothos, and we are going to take single node cuttings from it. Node is the section where the leaf and the stem meet, and they often form these little nodules which will eventually form roots once put in water or put in soil. So on that note, the method of propagation I'm going to show today is water propagation. Another way to do it is essentially just take your vine, stick it into a pot of soil, and root it that way. You can either do that after you've cut it off of the plant, or you can actually do it while it's still attached. And then after these nodules turn into roots, then you can cut the mother plant off of that cutting, and then you'll have another plant. So whenever you're doing a cutting, start with a clean pair of snips, scissors, pruners, whatever you're going to use. It just minimizes the likelihood of any bacteria or fungus getting in the cut and causing your cutting to rot before it actually roots. So with the cutting, you're going to want to cut right below the nodes. And in this one, I'm going to take another node cutting. So you're going to cut on either side of it. You don't want to have all this extra stem because that's just going to rot. So if you have a lot smaller stem, it's less likely that this is going to rot. You then take your cuttings and you stick them into a glass of water. If you would like to, you can put some saran wrap over this and then puncture holes in the saran wrap to keep the leaves above the water, or if you had a shallower glass, or maybe like a shot glass or something with a smaller lid, then the leaves will stay above the water because they're too big to fall into the glass. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this for a few more just to get more than one cutting. The negative about doing cuttings this way is that it takes a long time for them to actually put out a growing tip, whereas another cutting method that I'm going to show you, if you do it that way, the growing tip is already on the cutting and will grow much faster. We always throw our cuttings, any plant material that we get, into a compost bowl, and then we bring it outside to the compost bin. So there's that cutting. This is a golden pothos, or pothos, however you want to say it. This one, I'm going to take more of a stem cutting. It's going to have many nodes on it rather than just every single node. You can do that with this plant. It will work. However, because I want to show you something different, I'm going to take a bigger cutting. So on this stem, which is quite long, I'm going to take a 2-node cutting with this. So there's one node here, this is the growing tip, and then you have a second node, and I'm going to cut just below it. So you can tell from the node because there's the line here where the leaf meets, and then again you can see these little nubs that will eventually turn into roots. These nubs are here because this plant naturally grows up trees, and so when this is on a tree, these will root around and into the bark on the tree and kind of hold themselves onto the tree. They're known as aerial roots. So after cutting just below this node, we remove this leaf, because if you don't, it would be in water and this would rot in water. And then you just take this and stick it into water. This water is a little high. I'll dump some out after this video so that this second node isn't in water. If you want, you can leave them both in water. However, that means both of them will form roots. If that's what you want, that is totally fine. I'm just going to force this one to put out roots so that when I plant it, I can plant this part of the stem and leave this as the growing tip above the water, or above the soil. And then I'm going to take another cutting from this same stem, because just because this does not have a growing tip, I can still take a similar cutting. So I'm going to get rid of all this excess stem here because this will not form a growing tip. This part will actually just dry and die, and I don't want it to have bacteria in it that's going to, as this rot's going to ruin my cutting. And then on this one, I'm actually going to take a 3-node cutting, so I'm going to cut down here. There's no particular reason. I could take just the 2 nodes. I could take 1 node like I did on the other pothos again, but I'm just going to take this bottom leaf off and then put it in a glass of water. And when I do that, on this one, right at the node junction, right below the leaf, is usually where the growing tip will come out. So after this roots, there'll eventually be a growing tip that shows up here, and then that'll grow a new vine. And similarly on the plant, where I took the cutting from, there will be a growing tip that forms eventually out of that leaf junction and then turns into a new vine. That's a great way to control your vines. So by taking these cuttings, obviously if you don't want to root them, you don't have to, but if you want to, share your cuttings with friends, that's a great way to do it so that you don't have to go and buy plants. You can just propagate what you already have and share them with friends. And then last but not least, this is, well, we call it the Purple Queen. It's a type of Trascanthia. These leaves are actually slightly fuzzy. This plant is interesting because the more light you give it, the closer the leaves will grow together, and the more purple the plant will be. The less light you give it, the more green you will see on the plant. So on this one, I'm not sure if you could take single node cuttings. I presume you probably could. I never have. This one, I usually just take a multi-node cutting with a growing tip and then stick it in water and root it. So this one, I'm going to cut. This node is here, again, right where this leaf meets the stem. But as you can see, there are no aerial roots on this plant. This plant usually grows and vines and then hits the soil, and then after it hits the soil, roots start coming out of the plant. So this plant does not have those aerial roots like the pothos to attach to trees. So we're going to take a cutting just below the leaf and then remove as much of the leaf as you can, because it's essentially going to rot away once it goes into water. I'm going to remove multiple leaves. Again, whenever you take a cutting, if it has a lot of leaves on top, every leaf allows water to evaporate from it. So if this cutting has a lot of leaves on it, then the water will evaporate from it, and this can actually die before it has a chance to form roots, which will then soak up more water and allow for it to grow a new plant. So we're just going to do the same thing, stick that into water. I'm actually going to go over and grab another plant that is very similar to this. It's in the same family, and show you what happens after you've cut the plant and how it can put some growing tips out of the leaf junction. So this here is another Trascanthia. It's known as the teddy bear vine. This one is also fuzzy. Not all Trascanthias are fuzzy. The wandering Jew is another name for a very common Trascanthia that's slightly striped. That one is not fuzzy. This one happens to have purple underside of the leaves, the leaves on top always stay green. And from this one, I actually took a cutting here, and you can see after I took that cutting, it grew 2 growing tips, and I did the same thing on this vine as well, where I took a cutting, and at the junction of this leaf, 2 growing tips came out, so that can happen as well, and will help you to have more of a bushier plant and form more vines, rather than just have a single vine that goes out. And also, whenever you're doing these cuttings, I don't know if you can get in here, but sometimes, since it knows the tips are, I think there's multiple, there's actually like 2 here that are coming out. Since the plant feels the tips are being cut off, it puts some energy into making those new growing tips, and then again will fill out your container a bit better. So that's it for propagation of different vining plants. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.